Hi friends, I hope all of you are doing really well in these tough times. I'm here to discuss with you the FMG exam questions pertaining to the subject of pathology. Before I start the discussion of the question paper with you, let us just analyze the questions which were asked in the exam. So I found that just like the August 2020 exam, the questions have been given from the most high topics. The only difference is the similarity in the pattern that nowadays they are not going to be asking you direct questions. So as we have been talking about the different kinds of facts along with the concepts in the videos, those people who have watched the main videos in the app carefully, followed by a revision from the snapshot section, are the ones who benefited the most. Let us just have a look at the questions to realize the importance of what I'm trying to say to you. So all those of you people who are going to be appearing in the exam henceforth, I strongly recommend you to go through the main videos from the app and then have a wonderful quick revision from the rapid revision section. Let's get started. Now looking at the first question, the question asked in the exam was the image below shows origin from which of the following cells. Now this is an example of a question which we have talked about time and again, and it was almost a direct repeat from our discussion from the main videos. Now we understand the fact I did talk about this example of a cell, the cell which is going to be having two nuclei, which is going to be having the prominent nucleoli, and this cell, as most of us understand, is given the name of the Reed-Sternberg cell. So initially in the exams, they used to just ask about the tumor where we have the presence of the Reed-Sternberg cell, right? Then they asked about the appearance of the Reed-Sternberg cell. Then in this particular question, what they are asking you is that you need to first identify the cell given in the question over here, which is a Reed-Sternberg cell. They have not asked you about the tumor in which it is found, but an indirect way of putting up a question, they have asked you what is the cell which is going to be responsible for the origin of the Reed-Sternberg cell. Now, we had a discussion in the main app as well that when we talk about the Reed-Sternberg cell, it is a derivative of the B cell. Otherwise also, most of you are going to be able to remember the fact that whenever you're talking about this kind of a tumor given the name of Hodgkin's lymphoma is an example of a B cell tumor. So the answer was pretty straightforward so far as this kind of a question is concerned. It is option A. Now having a look at the other important options given over here, when we talk about the CD4 T cells, the CD4 T cells are obviously the cells which are going to be given the name of the helper T cells. You need to be familiar with the fact that it is going to be having two important subtypes as we discussed in the section on immunity, which is going to be playing an important role in different types of the hypersensitivity reactions. So let us just recall the fact that when we talk about Th1, this is going to be important for the pathogenesis of type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. As and when I'm making a mention of something like Th2, this is going to be very important for the pathogenesis of type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. Having a look at option C over here, which is the NK cell, so very favorite of your examiners, an important example of a cell which is an integral component of innate immunity. Natural killer cell is going to act by the property of directly acting on the cancer infected cells as well as the virus infected cells. So very important defense mechanism against the virus infected and the tumor cells. And the other thing that I hope all of you can recall over here is the markers by which we pick up the NK cell, that is going to be something like CD16 and CD56. If I'm talking about option D over here, that happens to be the CD8 T cell, which is going to be an example of the cytotoxic T cell, a cell which is also going to be important in the pathogenesis of type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. So what we understand and learn from this question is that the questions in the exam are going to be asked from the topics that we are talking about in the app, the high content for you time and again. The only difference would be that instead of asking you a direct question in the exam, they might as well ask you an applied question. So just try to take a practice of those kind of questions, which I'm sure is going to be responsible for a lot of you cracking that question very successfully in the exam henceforth. Looking at the next question, we need to be familiar with the question which talks about what is the location of the lactate dehydrogenase enzyme present inside the cell. Now that was an example of a question which is almost an indirect repeat of what they had given you in the August 2020 exam. We had a discussion about the fact that when we are talking about the lactate dehydrogenase enzyme, it is an example of an intracellular enzyme. And as I can just help you recall from our discussion earlier, this is the location of the enzyme, which means it is an example of an intracellular cytosolic enzyme. Why did we talk about it? Because I hope you can recall, whenever there is going to be a damage at the level of the cardiac cell membrane, this particular enzyme is likely to be leaking out, and therefore the level of this particular enzyme was increasing inside the blood. Therefore, it is going to be one of the important markers. And if you can possibly recall, the last enzyme to increase in a patient suffering from myocardial infarction. The second significance, as we talked about, pertaining to the lactate dehydrogenase was with respect to the special stain and the image that they had given you in the August 2020 exam. So triphenyl tetrazolium chloride is going to be normally staining the viable tissue or the living cell as brick red. But if there is a myocardial infarction, the enzyme is going to be leaking out and that is going to be giving you a pale yellow color. So the same thing, a direct repeat from what I described to you in the main app section as well. So TTC is what was a previous exam question. That is what we definitely need to remember. We need to be familiar with the normal appearance of the tissue, brick red, as well as after myocardial infarction, the pale or the yellow appearance. So therefore, the question is going to be answered easily. The answer for this particular question happens to be option B. Now, when I had a discussion with certain people were of the opinion that the question asked in the exam was with respect to something like the lysosomal enzymes. Nonetheless, we need to be familiar with the fact that even the lysosomal enzymes are going to be present in the cytosol. Remember the fact when I had discussed with you in the cellular changes of inflammation, I did talk about the fact that this is the location of the lysosomal enzymes and we have the entry of a bacteria in the form of the formation of a phagosome. Remember, we talked about the fact that the bacteria is then going to be brought near the lysosome and subsequently this bacteria is going to be fusing with the lysosome. So we have a fusion of the phagosome and the lysosome. So what the examiner did was they just wanted to test your basics, and if you were aware of this particular fact, I mean even from the kind of diagrams that we made, the question could have been correct easily that the lysosomal enzymes are going to be present in the cytosol. We are having a discussion over here, so let us just recall the fact quickly that if there is going to be a problem with this kind of a transport of the phagosome near the lysosome, what is the disorder that an individual is going to be suffering from? Yes, you are very right. Most of you can recall that fact. The condition is going to be given the name of the Shirdia-Higashi syndrome. So you remember the combination of albinism, and then this guy was having increased infection, and then he was having a platelet problem, therefore he was having increased risk of hemorrhage, and then he was having neurological manifestations. So the answer to this particular question is to be remembered as cytosol. So whether they were talking about the lactate dehydrogenase enzyme or whether they are talking about the lysosomal enzyme, the answer for the question is going to be something like the cytosol. Looking at the next question, it talks about a 56-year-old diabetic patient who has suffered from chronic renal failure and is undergoing hemodialysis. Which of the following amyloid is most likely to get deposited? Now again, an example of a direct repeat question from our main app section. I did talk about the fact that they would be giving you a question on chronic kidney disease. We understand the fact from our discussion of nephrology that the commonest reason for chronic kidney disease in India and globally happens to be diabetes mellitus. So when you are having chronic kidney disease, the patients are going to be undergoing chronic hemodialysis for a long duration of time. The earlier membranes which were used in the hemodialysis machines were not able to filter out the beta-2 microglobulin, and therefore gradually over a period of time the level of the beta-2 microglobulin is going to be increasing in the blood of the patient. This extra beta-2 microglobulin is likely to get deposited in the form of amyloid. So almost the same thing, almost the same words, almost the same picture is what was given to you over here. Just the clinical way of asking you a question that when you're talking about something like a patient undergoing hemodialysis, what is the nature of the amyloid? So straightforward question, I would say, friends. And I do believe that majority of you who have gone through the video section in the main app of pathology would have marked it correctly, A beta 2. Let us also recall and talk about the other important options, because amyloidosis is an example of a very, very high topic so far as the screening exam is concerned. When you talk about option A over here, you are going to be associating this with something like secondary amyloidosis, an example of a condition that you are going to be associating with two important risk factors. One can be, yes, all of you can remember that, chronic inflammatory conditions or chronic infection, and the second can be certain examples of cancers like Hodgkin's and kidney cancer, right? When we are talking about something like A beta, I have talked about this particular fact with a trick with you as well. A beta is something that you see in an individual who has been diagnosed with a condition that is going to be given the name of Alzheimer's disease. So they might as well give you a question in the exam where they talk about an elderly individual who has experienced forgetfulness in the recent times, and then they talk about the fact that this guy was not saved, and on autopsy we found certain changes inside the brain, and one of the important findings that you associate with Alzheimer's disease is the deposition of the A beta subtype of amyloid. We talk about the option D over here, which is going to be A cal. Remember cal for calcitonin, and this is something that you associate in a patient who is going to be suffering from a condition like the medullary cancer arising from the thyroid gland. So we can be given a question in the exam wherein they talk about an individual who is going to be having the presence of a thyroid mass, and then this individual is going to be having the presence of certain types of electrolyte disturbance in the terms of the involvement of calcium. So when you talk about something like medullary cancer of the thyroid, you need to remember the fact that this is an example of a thyroid cancer which is going to be arising from the parafollicular cells. That's the point that they ask you typically as a part 2 question of your exam. We need to recall the fact that there is going to be elevated concentration of calcitonin that is going to be seen in these individuals. So calcitonin is going to be a tumor marker. That's the other way of putting up a paper 1 question for your exam. Calcitonin is a tumor marker for medullary thyroid cancer, and this extra calcitonin can get deposited in the form of amyloid. Therefore, the chemical nature of the amyloid that you have in case of medullary thyroid cancer happens to be ACAL. So the question is going to be applied, and I repeat that fact. Watch the videos carefully. We are there to help you out with all of those questions in the exam, but just stay connected with us. We are going to be conducting certain sessions also for your benefit. For the answer of this question, I just repeat, it is going to be option C, that is going to be A beta 2. Looking at the next question, the question talked about what is the likely diagnosis of the condition looking at the image. Now, this was an example of perhaps the only tweaked question which I found in the current examination, friends. We have talked about this kind of a topic in the main app section, wherein I did talk about an example of a very important tumor from the perspective of a pathology question as well as from the perspective of a ophthalmology question in the exam. Time and again, we have talked about this tumor, which is retinoblastoma. So the classical question in the exam always had to be based on something like the gene location for the RB. That used to be chromosome 13q14. Then they used to ask you a question about the guy who gave the association between retinoblastoma and tumorigenesis, Knudsen. They talked about the double hit hypothesis. They talked about the two variants, sporadic and the familial variant. And then they talked about the concept of something like loss of heterozygosity. It was perhaps for the first time that they had asked you a question in the exam, in a screening exam, when they talked about the image over here. So we did talk about that particular fact theoretically, and I want you to remember that fact that in case of certain types of tumors, what we are getting over here is the presence of a flower-like pattern. Now this flower-like pattern, friends, is what is going to be given the name of a rosette. So rosette means a flower-like pattern. The difference is that you need to understand, as we talked about with respect to retinoblastoma in the videos as well, that the kind of rosette that we have in case of retinoblastoma is being given a special name. It is given the name of Flexner-Winter-Steiner rosettes. Flexner-Winter-Steiner rosettes. Why do we need to talk about the Flexner-Winter-Steiner rosettes now from the perspective of an image-based question is a fact. Fact number 1, please remember, this is an example of a true rosette. Now a question would come to your mind, what is the meaning of a true rosette? What do you mean by a false rosette? You see, true rosette is an example of a situation where the tumor cells are going to be arranging themselves in a flower-like pattern. And in the center, if you can appreciate over here, friends, I will just enlarge it for you. There is going to be the presence of an empty lumen. So this lumen, if I can show you on the pic on the left side, is going to be empty. So tumor cells arranging themselves in a flower-like pattern, and you find that there is going to be a central empty area. This is what is going to be given the name of a true rosette. And this kind of a rosette is classically what you see in case of a patient who is going to be suffering from the condition that he wanted you to answer correctly over here, which is going to be retinoblastoma. Now, just to cater to a question which they may ask you in the subsequent exam, you can be having a situation in which you are going to be having a flower-like pattern of the tumor cells. But what is going to be given in the question is going to be that this is going to be having the presence of certain types of fibrillary material over here. If there is an empty lumen over here, it is a true rosette. If there is a fibrillary material present over here, you cannot call it as a true rosette then. Now, such an example of a rosette is what is going to be given the important name of the Homer Wright rosette. So even though the name that you are going to be using over here happens to be a rosette, but I want you to remember that in case of Homer Wright rosette, you are going to be having the central presence of certain types of fibrils. That's point number 1. And this is not going to be an example of a true rosette. So in case of Homer Wright rosettes, the better word I would recommend you to be familiar with happens to be pseudo rosette. Just to help you understand that with the help of an image, this is what is going to be the image of a representation of a Homer Wright pseudo rosette. So what you find over here is the central pinkish material, which is going to be the presence of the fibrillary material. So that fibrillary material is what is going to be responsible for the term that is being used over here, the Homer Wright pseudo rosette. So I just repeat my point. Flexner-Winter-Steiner rosette is a true rosette, classically seen in a patient suffering from retinoblastoma. When you are talking about a Homer Wright rosette, it's an example of a pseudo rosette because of the presence of the central fibrils. And this kind of a Homer Wright rosette is what is going to be seen in case of certain other conditions, which I'm just going to be making a mention of over here. So I want you to be familiar with the fact, Flexner-Winter-Steiner, the answer of choice that you need to remember is retinoblastoma. Please remember that uncommonly the flexner intestinal rosette can also be seen in a patient suffering from medulloblastoma. Why do I want you to remember that point is, God forbid if they give you a question in exam in which retinoblastoma is not given as an option for the flexner intestinal rosette, then the next answer perhaps that you can tick in the exam happens to be something like medulloblastoma. Having said that, if you are asked question in the exam pertaining to the location of the Homer right rosette, then the Homer right rosette is going to be seen in case of a pediatric tumor affecting the adrenal gland. I have discussed that with you in the discussion of neoplasia as well. Do you remember the adrenal gland tumor seen in case of children, classically responsible for causing ocular metastasis? Yes, a lot of you should be able to remember that fact. The tumor that I am talking about over here with you happens to be something that is going to be given the name of neuroblastoma. So neuroblastoma is an example of a tumor that is going to be associated with Homer right pseudorosettes. You can also be having a patient suffering from medulloblastoma to be having the presence of the Homer right pseudorosettes. So what we need to be familiar with over here is that for the two different types of rosettes, the answer of choice for a true rosette, retinoblastoma; for a Homer right rosette, the answer has to be neuroblastoma. If they are not given, then you have a very good tumor in the form of a medulloblastoma, which is going to be the second best answer for each of them. I hope the concept is going to be clear to you. We can just quickly have a recap about the points that we talked about in association with retinoblastoma earlier. So this is going to be an example of a tumor which is going to be having a clinical presentation in the form of, yes, the smile on your faces tell me that you know the answer. So patients are going to be having the presence of leukocoria, that means the presence of a cat eye reflex. Remember the fact the tumor is notorious for being malignant in nature, so it classically causes involvement of the optic nerve. We also need to remember the fact that when we talk about this kind of a tumor, it is going to be associated with elevated levels of LDH in the aqueous humor. All those have been extremely high points about which we did make a mention of in the app in the video section as well. But this was the first time that we got an image-based question in the screening exam with respect to something like retinoblastoma. So do pay attention to the discussion on the question that I just made with you, and hopefully for this question as well as for subsequent questions, you will be having a smooth sailing in the exams. Looking at the next question, a 50-year-old man presented with gum bleeding and fatigue. His peripheral smear showed marked leukocytosis with 70% of the cells showing MPO positivity. Now, when they're talking about an individual who's going to be having a combination of gum bleeding and fatigue, that means a problem is going to be there in the respectively the platelets as well as in the RBCs. He is having marked leukocytosis as well. So that means that there is going to be a possibility that the individual is going to be heading in for something like a leukemia-like condition. And the question is going to be having a very good hint given to you when he says 70% of the cells show MPO positivity. Now, easy for us to rule out when we talk about the options in the exam, because we have talked about this particular thing in the snapshot section as well as in the main videos. I did talk about the fact when you are having a short duration of history of presentation, especially of a dysfunction of RBCs, of WBCs, of platelets, you have to think in case of something like an acute leukemia. However, the difference that we find is, and ruling out those options one by one, if I'm going to be talking about something like ALL, ALL is an example of a leukemia that is classically going to be seen in case of a child. So pediatric leukemia. When we are talking about ALL, I also want you to remember the same thing that I did talk about with you, that the cells in case of ALL are going to be having a positivity for the stains like TDT and PAS. Your question in the exam specifically mentioned about the tumor cells which were having MPO positivity. They may replace it with a second stain in the exam subsequently, which should be remembered by you, which is going to be Sudan Black B. So the stains for the leukemia cells, especially with respect to the lymphoblast and the myeloblast, have to be remembered by you. That is going to be an extremely pertinent piece of information. Having said that, going back to our discussion, ALL is ruled out because it is going to be seen in case of children who are going to be having TDT and PAS positivity. If you were talking about something like CLL, CLL is going to be seen in case of elderly individuals. They are going to be having non-specific symptoms. But then what you find in case of CLL is that these individuals are going to be having the presence of tumor cells which are going to be having a special appearance in the peripheral smear that we talked about in the video discussion with you as well, the smudge cells. He is going to be making a mention of the fact that when we are talking about something like CML, he is going to be talking about something like a right upper quadrant, or a patient is going to be having upper quadrant discomfort, particularly on the left side because of massive splenomegaly. And then he would be making a mention of something like maybe a combination of basophils and eosinophils being observed in the peripheral smear. When we talk about something like CML, easy for you to recall, we have to talk about something like the translocations, the translocation 922, the Philadelphia chromosome, the increased tyrosine kinase activity, so on and so forth. So for this particular question, I do believe that the answer would have been clearly marked by a majority of you pretty well, that should be ticked up as AML. Not to forget the fact, when he is going to be giving a question on AML, he can be talking about the different subtypes of AML that we have talked about so many times earlier. So most frequently in the exam, and let us just have a recall that you are going to be given a question in the exam talking about a translocation 1517, which is going to be responsible for development of a complication like DAC. Having said that, I request you to go through the videos of leukemias, at least these 4 leukemias from the main app section, so that you develop your concepts right, as well as you are familiar with the approach to a patient who is going to be having such a condition. So again, a direct repeat question, and I do believe you are going to be marking all the future questions in the exam concerned with this topic of leukemia correct as well. Looking at the next question, an 83-year-old man shows the presence of a perinuclear pigment in the cardiac muscle fiber. Now, I have talked about this particular thing with you in great details in the video section, friends. I want you to recall the fact that he is talking about an elderly individual. So, think in terms of a senile pathology. He gives you a hint with respect to a perinuclear pigment. And when we are talking about a perinuclear pigment, especially causing involvement of the cardiac muscle, I mean, this is something which is very clinching. We have to remember the fact over here. The answer for this question happens to be something like lipofuscin. So we talked about with respect to lipofuscin, all the points that are appearing on your screen is what I talked with you in the videos as well. This is going to be an example of a pigment that is known by the name of wear and tear pigment. So associated with aging. We did talk about the fact it is associated with something like the perinuclear location and a golden brown color. With that image that I would like you to be having an idea about, since the current pattern of the examination is giving you the images as well. So there is a possibility that they may kind of, give a clinical history based question, and then 4 images are placed in front of you and they may ask you to pick it up. So a similar kind of discussion is what we had a day prior to the main exam. Me and Dr. Deepak Marwa sir had that discussion with you on the YouTube, and the question in the exam therefore happens to be like really simple over here. So we need to be familiar with the answer over here. That is going to be something like lipofuscin. Having said that, just an important word about the other options over here. Hemocitrin is going to be an example of an iron derived pigment. The other important thing that you need to remember over here is an example of a stain that is being used over here. So Pearl stain / Pearl's reaction is what they talk about in the exam when we are using something like a Prussian blue. When we are talking about option C over here, which is going to be melanin, so that is going to be an example of a pigment responsible for the black color of our skin and hair. And this is going to be an important pigment because this is going to be the only endogenous pigment which is going to be black in color. When we are talking about something like iron, obviously iron is going to be stored in the body, not in the free form, because it can result in the formation of free radicals. So it has to be converted into something like ferritin. That's an exam question for you. And then this ferritin is subsequently going to get converted into the pigment which is going to be given the name of hemocitrin. What is not mentioned over here, and a very, very important high pigment for your exam, happens to be something like calcium. So I request you to go through the videos in the app so far as the pigment topic is concerned, and the question of the exam is going to be cracked by you very, very comfortably. Looking at the next question, the question talked about the fact the disease which had the presence of the deposition of the tau protein. Again, a direct question from our discussion in the main videos, wherein we talked about the example of a condition that is going to be given the name of Alzheimer's disease. The most common cause of memory loss in case of human beings, which is associated with the presence of plaque depositions and tangles. I was talking about the composition of the plaques and tangles with you, friends, in the main video as well. So I did talk about the presence of something like A beta peptide, what was given as an option in the amyloidosis question also. And we did make a mention of something like the abnormal tau protein. So remember about tau, it used to be an integral component of the microtubules, thereby providing them stability. If the tau is going to become hyperphosphorylated, the stability of the microtubules is going to get compromised. So we need to talk about the tau protein in association with something like Alzheimer's disease, and therefore the answer for this question becomes absolutely clear. That happened to be option D. Now having a look at the other options over here, when we talk about something like the CJ disease or the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, this is going to be an example of a prion disease is what I want you to be familiar with. Of course, from your knowledge of microbiology as well as from medicine, you do have an idea about the other important examples of prion diseases like the bovine spongiform encephalopathy. When we are talking about something like rabies, standard question asked in the exam, they would be giving a question on something like the Negri bodies. and they would expect you to be familiar with the fact, the kind of immunization schedule that is going to be community medicine question that is going to be required once an individual has suffered from something like a dog bite. When we are talking about the option C over here, which is going to be something like Parkinson's disease, we did talk about the role of dopamine over here as well as the role of the second neurotransmitter acetylcholine over here. So that is going to be a very, very important fact required for cracking pharmacology questions. We need to be familiar with pertaining to Parkinsonism, the involvement of something like the substantia nigra. We need to be familiar with the fact that the patients at times are going to be having the presence of a structure that is going to be given the name of Lewy body. I just take the opportunity to revise with you what is the name of the body that is going to be seen in a patient having Alzheimer's. Now, when you talk about rabies, we talk about Negri bodies. When we are talking about something like Parkinsonism, we are talking about Lewy bodies. With respect to Alzheimer's, I want you to remember the name of the important body which can be seen inside the cells. Then this is going to be given the name of a Hirano body. So this discussion is going to be relatively easy, and CNS is one of the less often read topics in the exam. But as I talk about that time and again, do not leave a topic, friends. Even though you may be finding a topic a bit difficult to comprehend, just have a look at the topic at least once so that you have a hang about the kind of a topic, or you have an overview about the topic in general. Now, one of the debated versions of this kind of questions that was shared with by some of the students happened to be, which of the following disease would show you the deposition of the prion protein. So, if you are aware about the concept, I mean, whether he is asking you a question on substantia nigra, or he is asking a question on tau protein, or he talks about the prion disease, if the concept is clear, then we can crack any question in the exam. So, do not be bogged down by the length of the question. Do not be bogged down by the presence of an image in a question. Just focus on your concepts. Keep on revising, and I'm sure for this question also, obviously the answer is now clear to you. Prion disease happens to be something like a component of the CJ disease, and you need to be familiar with the other important examples of the conditions as well. Looking at the next question, we talk about a 55-year-old patient presented with difficulty in breathing and rashes after ingestion of seafood. Now, any individual who's going to be having a difficulty in breathing and having an allergy kind of reaction after seafood should alert you to the possibility of a particular hypersensitivity reaction. Let's read the question further. He has shown similar reaction in the past following consumption of the same food items, which means that this individual is having a history of development of clinical symptoms after consumption of a particular type of food material. This means this guy is going to be allergic to this particular food. And when we are talking about the question, it talks about which of the following is a hypersensitivity reaction which you are going to be relating with this. Now, again, an example of a question which is a direct line from what I had discussed with you in the main video when we were talking about the type 1 hypersensitivity reaction, wherein I talked about this copyrighted mnemonic of mine, ABCD. I did talk about the fact that the patients are going to be having an allergy, and specifically what they give you as allergies, because a lot of you have had an international travel as well. So even on the aeroplanes, even on the flights you find, even on the ships you find that they would be making you cautious about the presence of usually two important things. Peanuts, very, very important cause of allergy in a lot of people, and then they would making you cautious about the presence of something like seafood. So that is going to be an example of something like the type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. That was a relatively easy question for us to be familiar with. Having said that, this is an example of an often encountered situation in the real world. So you must always remember the pharmacology link, and that is one of the most high topics that they would be keeping you asking in the exam time and again. So once you are going to be talking about a condition like type 1 hypersensitivity reaction, this might be associated with development of a condition that is going to be given the name of anaphylaxis. Now, because anaphylaxis can be an example of a life-threatening situation, so we need to be familiar with the treatment of this particular condition as well, and that is going to be the drug of choice, adrenaline. Of course, you are going to be requiring the other support to the patient as well. So, adrenaline is going to be the life-saving drug for this patient in a dose of 0.5 milliliters, and you need to remember the fact that the concentration being used over here is 1:1000 intramuscularly. So, having said that, I just want you to be familiar with that fact, because this is an example of a drug which a lot of you are going to be carrying all times 24/7 as and when you do practice and do the service to the nation. Talking about the other important options over here, type 2 hypersensitivity reaction, the antibody mediated hypersensitivity reaction. So we remember the mnemonic I told you in the main app was, well, my blood group is RS negative. Sorry, my blood group is RS positive. RS negative actually is my blood group. So I, just talked about that factual phase to you. So my blood group is RS positive is the mnemonic. When you talk about type 3, the acronym that we talked about was SHARP. And when we talk about type 4, we had two important conditions, the delayed type hypersensitivity as well as the CD8 T cell activation contributing to this type of a reaction. So I believe the question was relatively easy for most of you to pick up, and let's talk about the next question. Now the question in the exam was based on the given peripheral smear, which of the following is the most likely diagnosis? Now this was an example of a question that we did talk about or make a mention of in the snapshot section as well. What was characteristically given in the image in the exam was the arrows were marked to a particular shape of the RBCs, and these RBCs, as you can find, were not normal. They were stretched out and they were appearing just like a drop. So we did have a discussion about even this fact as well when we are talking about a condition that is going to be given the name of myelofibrosis. Easy for us to understand. Myelo means marrow. Once you're going to be having fibrosis in the bone marrow, the RBCs are going to be requiring an extra effort to go out of the marrow. Now during this extra effort, the RBC membrane is likely to become stretched, and that is what is going to be responsible for this kind of an appearance of the RBCs, which I did make a mention of to you over there as well, friend, the teardrop RBCs. Now, when we talk about the teardrop RBCs, they are being asked in the exam by a second important name of dicryocytes. Please also be familiar with the fact that when you have fibrosis in the marrow, you can be having certain immature cells of the WBC series also appearing in the blood. So we need to be familiar with an example of a term that is going to be used in the exam, the leukoerythroblast. The immature RBCs are also appearing. The nucleated RBCs would be appearing in the peripheral smear. So the teardrop RBCs and leukoerythroblastosis is going to be associated with something like myelofibrosis. Why do we need to talk about myelofibrosis is also because of the fact that once the patients are going to be having this condition, they are going to be having the development of something like a pancytopenia-like manifestation. Let us look at the other options. A standard favorite for your examiners. Iron deficiency anemia would only be having the presence of microcytic hypochromic RBCs. So the peripheral smear would be showing you the enlargement of the central pale area. Had it been a situation where we would have talked about something like thalassemia major, you would have been, getting something like a microcytic hypochromic RBCs, or you could be getting the presence of even at times cells which are given the name of target cells. When we are talking about something like myelodysplastic syndrome, usually an example of an advanced kind of a topic, but myelodysplastic syndrome is going to be associated with the presence of ringed sideroblast. You are having the presence of something like the Pelger-Hue anomaly, and we talk about something like the Pon ball megakaryocyte in case of myelodysplastic syndrome. So even if you have a slight idea about myelodysplastic syndrome, that is more than sufficient. But all in all, at least about the first three conditions, you must always have an idea. The only tweak thing that the examiner did was, instead of giving you that term teardrop RBC, they gave you an image over here this time around. But thankfully, we did have a discussion about that particular fact as well along with the image. So I believe the question, even though slightly tough, I would say, would have been correctly marked by a lot of you. Looking at the next question, a 10-year-old boy presented with a swollen knee after suffering from a trauma. Now, when you talk about a child who has suffered from a trauma and then he's going to be having the presence of swollen knee, that could be because of the blood accumulating inside the joint, and that is what is going to be given the name of hemarthrosis, something I discussed with you in the form of an image and a concept. Why is that important for us to keep in mind is because this is highly suggestive of the patient suffering from a clotting factor deficiency. So having said that, if this particular fact would have been understood by you, then the question becomes very, very easy. Which of the following is a likely condition in the patient? The only example of a clotting factor deficiency that he has given over here as the commonest clotting factor deficiency happens to be the factor 8 deficiency. So we understand the fact this is associated with something like hemophilia A. Why do I rule out something like the presence of von Willebrand disease? Is because von Willebrand disease is associated with dysfunction at the level of platelets. So the patients are going to be having the presence of a mucosal bleed, something that is going to be similar to the platelet-like bleed that you would expect in the patient. So either petechiae or purpura, or you can be having mucosal bleeds. That is what is going to be seen in case of von Willebrand's. When we are talking about something like immune thrombocytopenia, obviously a platelet problem. So petechiae, purpura and skin rash is what is going to be manifested or given in the question. When we are talking about something like vitamin K deficiency, it cannot take place directly over a period of time. It usually takes place, especially when an individual is going to be having classically something like an alcohol-induced liver cirrhosis, or a person is going to be having a failure of the liver, or an individual is going to be having the presence of long duration fat malabsorption. So since the question's history was relatively very, I would say, pinpoint kind of history, wherein a child suffered from a trauma, he developed hemarthrosis. So we have to think in terms of a clotting factor deficiency, and factor 8 deficiency being the commonest, we picked up the answer as something like hemophilia A. Looking at the next question, we talk about a 47-year-old female presenting with arthralgia. She's having pain in her joints, difficulty in swallowing the food and a gritty feeling in the eyes. Now this was an example of a classical history that I shared with you, friends. As and when you are going to be having a lymphocytic infiltration and damage to the glands followed by fibrosis, you are classically going to be having the involvement of the lacrimal and the salivary glands. So you are going to be having a combination of dry eyes as well as dry mouth syndrome. Because of the dry mouth, the patients are going to be having a difficulty in swallowing the food. So the keyword over here was gritty feeling in a female who is having a combination of difficulty in swallowing of the food as well. Now, when we talk about the fact, the question did make a mention of the fact that this patient, so she is also found to be having an increased titers of anti-nuclear antibodies. Now, two things that I want you to keep in mind. Fact number one, anti-nuclear antibody presence is relatively non-specific. This can be seen in multiple autoimmune disorders. But the clinching thing in the question happened to be this kind of history given. So, difficulty in swallowing of the food, the gritty feeling, as well as the presence of an accessory manifestation like something like arthralgia. Having said that, because I did talk about that with you in the main app as well, so the answer becomes absolutely easy for us to remember over here. This is going to be something like the Sjogren syndrome. They had asked you a question in the exam earlier, and I want you to be familiar with that fact. With the same history, I can just tweak the question for you. And if they were to ask you, what is the most likely antibody that is going to be seen in this patient? So we understand the fact in a patient suffering from Sjogren syndrome, we are going to be having the presence of anti-Rho/anti-La antibodies. So they can be giving you the name of the antibodies in a subsequent question, which has been a direct question in the exam. This is something that we read about in pathology. This is something I'm sure has been discussed with you in the connective tissue disorder section in the medicine app as well. So we need to be familiar with the example of the antibodies that are going to be seen in this condition. Having a look at the other options, rheumatoid arthritis, the classical presentation would have been of a female, but then she is going to be getting up in the morning with a complaint of swelling and certain kind of morning stiffness. The question would definitely make a mention of, with respect to antibodies, that this patient is going to be having the presence of what we had talked about earlier as well, anti-CCP antibodies. When we are talking about option C over here, serum sickness is something that you associate with passive immunization. This is an example of a type 3 hypersensitivity reaction. So the individual is going to be having a history of received some kind of passive immunization in terms of, let us say, the sera. And these sera, if it is derived from something like an animal source, an equine source, then it would have resulted in something like the development of the sickness or the manifestations of the clinical condition in the patient. When we talk about option D over here, that is SLE, multi-system autoimmune inflammatory disorder, which we have talked about in detail so many times earlier, and a barrage of manifestations that they can be giving you in a question. Nonetheless, for this particular question, the clinching thing was the elevated ANA giving a hint of an autoimmune condition, the presence of gritty sensation in the eyes, as well as difficulty in swallowing of food, which made us think in terms of the damage at the level of the lacrimal as well as salivary glands, and therefore the answer to the question, the condition that is going to be ticked over here as Sjogren syndrome. Looking at the next question, a 3-year-old child is having progressive anemia. That's important. On examination, splenohepatomegaly is noted with malar eminence, prominence, and the peripheral smear is being showed over here. So when you think in terms of a child having anemia, which is gradually increasing along with splenohepatomegaly, you must always think in terms of something like a hemoglobinopathy. I mean, this is something which is almost a direct rip-off of the question that we did discuss with you in our live session. And we talked about over here that the clinical manifestations with this kind of a disease, I talked about in the main app section as well with you, is progressively increasing anemia, the severe anemia, stunted growth in a child, maral eminence giving to rise to something which is given the name of chimpanzee-like faces. You're going to be having the presence of splenohepatomegaly, and this is what is going to be making things very, very easy for you to be familiar with in the exam. That is a case of something like thalassemia. Now, when we talk about thalassemia, the peripheral smear is likely to show you the presence of microcytic hypochromic RBCs. And as I told you earlier also, you are having the presence of these types of RBCs, which are going to be having the presence of a central dot-like appearance. So this is given the name of a target cell. So microcytic hypochromic RBCs, I mean, look at those RBCs. They are having so much of pallor. They are having so much of pallor, and this is what is going to be suggestive of the presence of a deficiency at the level of the RBCs or a defect at the level of RBCs, along with the target cells, along with the classical history that he has given to you, is going to be making things easy for you to crack in the exam, thalassemia. Why do we need to talk about the other options over here? When we talk about microcytic hypochromic anemia, I mean, we had a discussion about this kind of a thing time and again. We are going to be ruling out something like iron deficiency anemia, because iron deficiency anemia, even though it can be seen in case of children, but then it is not likely to be having the presentation in the form of something like splenohepatomegaly. It is not likely to have something like malar eminence. When you're talking about sideroblastic anemia, you need to have a history of a patient who's going to be having some kind of maybe a congenital enzyme deficiency, or he can be talking about a situation in which this individual is going to be having, not a child, but usually in case of an adult, alcohol intake history, or they talk about a history of an individual who has suffered from a condition like tuberculosis and then he was put on anti-tubercular therapy. So those histories are not there, and on top of it, sideroblastic anemia again can be ruled out because you would not be having the presence of splenohepatomegaly, you would not be having the presence of Millar eminence. So that is what is helping us ruling out this option. The cause of sideroblastic anemia with respect to our forensic link happens to be one of the conditions which is suggestive of something like lead poisoning. So nothing in the history suggestive of something like lead poisoning. Otherwise, he would have made a mention of something like, that discoloration that you get on the gums. Then he talks about something like a foot drop kind of history. And then he talks about a microcytic hyperchromic anemia. So that would have gone in favor of something like lead poisoning. So the answer becomes absolutely clear over here. It is going to be option A in this question. Looking at the next question, 30-year-old woman is having progressive dysphagia. On examination, she is having thickening of the oral mucosa and a leather-like skin. So, when you think in terms of a patient having progressive dysphagia, that means there is a problem at the level of the muscular tube connecting the oral cavity with the stomach. That means a problem at the level of the esophagus. You have to rule that out. And on top of it, she is also going to be having the involvement of the skin, so thickening of the skin. The question makes a mention of the fact she is hypertensive, which means the problem can be at the level of the blood vessels as well. And she has limited exercise capacity due to lung fibrosis. So herein we are having a female who is going to be having involvement of multiple organs in the body. But the clinching thing that you must remember over here is involvement of the esophagus as well as the presence of a thickening of the skin. Now that is something that we did talk about an example of a condition, a connective tissue disorder. More likely and in extensive detail would have been discussed with you in medicine section, wherein we talk about the involvement of certain organs. The condition is being given the name of scleroderma. So derma, involvement of skin, thickening of the skin is what you find over here. You can have in the late stages involvement of the visceral component as well, which could have explained the presence of the pulmonary fibrosis and the presence of difficulty in breathing in this patient. So that's just something which is very, very often talked about thing in the exams. CREST syndrome, wherein we talk about something like calcinosis, wherein we talk about something like sclerodactyly, wherein we talk about esophageal dysmotility. I mean, in the same question, he would have also sometimes given a mention of something like the discoloration of the fingers, which is going to be seen particularly at the time of exposure to a cold temperature as well. So the answer to this particular question becomes very, very clear to us, friends. This happens to be something like scleroderma. And when you talk about scleroderma, the common thing that they ask you in the exam, the scleroderma can be having multiple variants. One variant of scleroderma is what is going to be given the name of CREST syndrome, that is given the name of the limited scleroderma. And the other one is what is going to be given the name of the diffuse scleroderma. Why do we need to talk about that is because both of them are going to be having the different subtypes of antibodies seen in them. When we are talking about something like the CREST syndrome, this is going to be associated with something like the anti-centromeric antibody. And as and when we're making a mention of something like diffuse scleroderma, a very importantly asked question in your exam so many times earlier, therefore I'm making a mention of this anti-topoisomerase antibody. So when you get involvement of the total organs in the body, diffuse involvement, that is topoisomerase, C for centromere, C for CREST, that's a simple trick. I can help you remember the fact with respect to the antibodies in context of scleroderma. Peutz-Jeghers syndrome would have been a question in the exam, but that comes with the history of a female patient who is going to be having the presence of two things, and that's the same thing is what me and Marva sir had discussed with you the day before the exam as well. You would be given a question where he talks about hamartomatous polyps along with hyperpigmentation at the level of the lips. So that is going to be associated with increased risk for development of the cancer of the bowel. So that is what is going to be given as a history of this patient. Post-cricoid dysphagia is going to be seen because of the presence of something like a luminal obstruction caused because of a mucosal protrusion, something that you might as well associate with the condition of esophageal web. And the condition that is very often asked in the exam is a combination of iron deficiency anemia and esophageal web, what is being given the name of the Patterson-Kelly-Brown syndrome, right? So we need to be familiar with that particular fact as well. Achalasia cardia would have been a condition in which the patient would have just presented with something like a dysphagia, but then you cannot explain the presence of something like the increased blood pressure of this patient, and you cannot explain the presence of lung fibrosis in this particular individual. Neither can you explain the presence of thickening of the skin. Achalasia cardia history usually would talk about the fact that patients are going to be having the trouble in swallowing a particular type of food material as well. And as I believe a lot of you understand the fact, in case of achalasia cardia, the trouble is going to be more for the liquid food in comparison to the solid food. So having said those important points, easy for us to understand, the backbone of this question, and this can be cracked both as an example of a medicine kind of a question, but with the limited information that we discussed, even then the question would have been cracked, and therefore the answer for the question happened to be something like option D, scleroderma. Talking about the next question, an elderly diabetic male underwent kidney transplantation. We have a hidden question over here as well, friends. As I talked about with you few minutes back in the discussion of another question, diabetes happens to be the number one cause of development of chronic kidney disease. So that these patients survive, they would have to undergo something like kidney transplantation. Now the question says that the transplant has been taken from his twin brother, and that was again a direct ripoff of what we had talked about in the videos as well. The source of the transplant is going to be responsible for having the 4 different types of the grafts that we talk about. So we can be having something like autograft when it has been taken from a cell, when you can talk about allograft taken from a different person in the same species. But when you are taking it from a different person, same species, but having the same genetic structure, that means identical twin, I for identical, I for isograft, that is the answer to this particular question. Xenograft, undoubtedly most of you understand, is when you're going to be taking the graft with respect to something like an individual from a different species altogether, something that we do in context of something like maybe the bovine tissue, or at times we are going to be taking it from the pigs. So the answer for this question becomes absolutely easy. That happens to be something like isograft. Looking at the next question, a 60-year-old male presented with low backache and X-ray of the lumbosacral spine showed osteoblastic changes. Now this was exactly an example of a question that we did talk about with you again and time and again. I talk about the fact elderly individual who is going to be having the presence of a lower backache. In real world, you must always rule out the presence of something like the prostate cancer as well as multiple myeloma. Now, a lot of you actually may have committed that mistake, which I found after interacting with you, that when they had looked at the history, elderly male, low backache, they didn't pay attention to what was the most important component of this question, osteoblastic changes. We cannot mark the answer as, and I repeat, we cannot mark the answer as multiple myeloma, because in multiple myeloma, you are going to be having the presence of osteolytic bone changes. So, if that would have been missed by you, then obviously you would have marked the wrong answer to the question. But when you're talking about an elderly male individual having backache, having presence of osteoblastic secondaries, something which I have discussed with you again in our discussion over here, osteoblastic, friends, happens to be classically what you find in case of something like prostate cancer. So we need to be familiar with the fact that with respect to something like this kind of a question, the answer would have been relatively easy, provided you have not missed out on the keyword or the catchword over here. The answer would have been something like option C. When we are talking about something like port spine, how are we going to be ruling out something like port spine? Because port spine is not going to be having the presence of osteoblastic changes, and additionally, the examiner would definitely give you a hint regarding the etiology or regarding the reason why he developed port spine. I mean, he can talk about the fact, this guy happened to be malnourished. He was also having cough, he was having fever, he was having the presence of something like at times ectopic hemoptysis episodes as well. So something to suggest that the individual was having an initial pulmonary tuberculosis infection. When we're talking about something like renal cell carcinoma, I mean, nothing to suggest of the fact that the patient is going to be having a renal cell carcinoma, but also need to remember the fact that whenever we're going to be talking about the presence of elderly male having backache, osteoblastic changes, remember the fact the first thing that you would always take in the exam happens to be prostate cancer. So I believe that is what is going to take care of the discussion for this kind of a question. Do make sure that you are going to be having a look at the important examples of the tumors which are going to be responsible for causing secondaries or metastasis in the bone. And when we are talking about the reasons, I mean, this can be a potential question in the exam in the future, a pediatric situation in which the patient is going to be having the metastasis taking place to the bones. The answer is going to be something like neuroblastoma. And obviously, you can obviously go to the main video section in detail to find out the other questions and the concepts that I have discussed with you. Looking at the next question, a child presenting with difficulty in eating due to a jaw swelling and enlarged cervical lymph nodes. A direct question that we discussed in the YouTube live session that we conducted for you. So jaw swelling along with the presence of enlarged lymph nodes, and the lymph node biopsy characteristically showing you the presence of those shiny star-like cells when we are talking about in a background of cells having a dark nuclei. So this is an indirect way of putting up a question to you in the exam. This appearance is what is going to be given the name of starry sky pattern. This appearance is given the name of starry sky pattern. Something that I have discussed with you with almost a similar kind of an image in my discussion, as well as something that we talked about in the YouTube live session. So I wanted to be familiar with that fact that the answer for this question happened to be really simple. That happened to be something like Burkitt's lymphoma. I did talk about that fact in the YouTube live session as well as I repeat that with you. They might as well give you the same history, the same image, and convert it into a microbiology question wherein he will talk about the etiological agent responsible for this kind of a change. So you understand the fact Burkitt's lymphoma is going to be having a very, very strong association with a virus like Epstein-Barr virus. Undoubtedly, Epstein-Barr virus in most of the individuals is going to be responsible for causing a condition that is given the name of infectious mononucleosis. And hopefully you do remember the fact with respect to infectious mononucleosis, you are often asked a question in the exam pertaining to the test for making a diagnosis of this condition, the Paul Banal test. Option A is something which is easy and we have talked about that in detail earlier. Option C, Kikuchi's disease is going to be, I would say, a topic I would not recommend you to go through but just remember the fact it's an example of a condition which is going to be having the presence of lymph node enlargement, and then there are certain characteristic features which are not required at your level. So I'll be more than happy if you can just have an idea about option A, B and D, and that starry sky appearance in the lymph node biopsy is what was the clinching thing so far as this kind of a question was concerned. Now talking about the next question, this was an example of a clinical image based question, but then comment on the diagnosis, the image that I had shown you in my discussion of the hepatic disorders, wherein I did talk about an example of a metabolic disorder affecting copper metabolism, and I did make a mention of something like ocular involvement in this patient. We did make a mention of something like the KF ring because of deposition of the free copper in the Descemet's membrane responsible for giving this kind of a golden ring in the eye, and that is exactly what they asked you as a question in the exam. So this was KF ring, and that was responsible for having its association with something like Wilson's disease. Having said that, just a keyword or two about the other options given in the exam. NF1, neurofibromatosis 1, is going to be an example of a condition in which the patients are going to be having the presence of multiple neurofibromas. This is going to be an example of a condition in which the patients are also going to be having the other manifestations in the form of Café-au-lait spots. So that is what is typically given to you as a kind of dermopath kind of a question. Option B, arcus sinalis, is an example of something that a lot of you have read in ophthalmology. The natural change, or I would say the change in the cornea because of the increasing age of an individual, is what is being given the name of arcus sinalis. When you talk about option D, myotonic dystrophy, they have actually given you a question in the exam pertaining to myotonic dystrophy again as an ophthalmology question, wherein he will be talking about something like, if you remember, the Christmas tree appearance. So not to bog you with too much of an ophthal information over here, which I believe a lot of you are going to be doing really well after watching those videos. The answer for this question happened to be Wilson's disease because it was almost a kind of a direct rip-off of the discussion that we have had. Looking at the next question, look at the image and comment on the likely diagnosis. The clinching thing in the diagnosis over here happened to be, the important part was the discoloration of the sclera that you had in this patient. So even though I would have talked about that particular fact with you in my discussion of when I did make a mention of something like the presence of osteogenesis imperfecta, wherein the patients are going to be having a defect in the collagen, because of which they are going to be having important manifestations in the form of they are going to be having weak bones, and you are going to be having the presence of a bluish discoloration of the sclera. So that is something which is going to be an important fact for you to be familiar with, and therefore the answer for this particular question happens to be option B. Having said that, option A is scurvy, which is going to be associated with so many manifestations that you are going to be reading about when you are going to be differentiating between scurvy and rickets. I would recommend you to go through the pediatric section as well as the radiology section to remember and be familiar with those differences. You know, that cupping phenomena, that metaphyseal widening and stuff. And then you're going to be having, in case of scurvy, something like the perifollicular hemorrhages, which they have so many times asked you earlier as a question in the exam. When we're talking about something like Paget's disease, usually an example of a condition in which there is going to be a mismatch between the osteoblast activity and the osteoclast activity, thereby resulting in a kind of an increased bone turnover. Not to forget the fact the patient is going to be having a very heavy skull. And the classical thing that is going to be written in the question is going to be something like the patient going to be having the presence of leonine facies in case of a bone disorder. So leonine facies along in case of a bone disorder is what you need to be familiar with respect to something like Paget's disease. Or he would make a mention of the fact that this guy is not able to wear his helmet because of increased size of the skull. So those are the things that you would need to keep in mind so far as Paget's disease is concerned. Obviously, an example of a hypermetabolic disorder. So this is also a risk factor for development of a bone tumor, and that is just going to be a revision for the pathophysiology based question of osteosarcoma. Having said that, going back to our question, we need to be familiar with the concept of blue sclera and the condition thereby associated, which is going to be osteogenesis imperfecta. Looking at the next question, owl eye appearance of the cells in the urine examination of a post-kidney transplant patient. I mean, again, a direct rip-off of the concept that some of you actually asked to us when we were having a discussion about the Reed-Sternberg cell, So sir and me did make a mention of the fact that Reed-Sternberg cells are going to be having the presence of an owl eye appearance because of a binucleate and a prominent nucleoli. But we did make a mention of the fact, as you can remember over here, that if you are going to be given a history of a patient who is going to be having immunosuppression, classically a patient who has undergone something like kidney transplant, then this is going to be associated with secondary opportunistic infection. And one of the important opportunistic infections that we have in these patients happens to be cytomegalovirus. Now, this cytomegalovirus is going to be associated with an important fact that you are going to be having the presence of an owl eye appearance over here as well. And I hope most of you who have watched that particular session were aware of the fact that one, he is going to be giving you a history of something like an organ transplant, like he did in the exam actually. And the second thing is, how do you distinguish between the owl eye appearance of Reed-Sternberg cell vis-a-vis the owl eye appearance in case of CMV. So in case of CMV, you see it as a viral infection. So we did explain you that he is going to be having inclusion bodies which are going to be present inside the cytoplasm as well as nucleus. I mean, sir was courteous enough to even dot that diagram for you to remember that fact. But for a future exam question, this is what I want you to keep in mind, that in case of Reed-Sternberg cell, you are just going to be having the presence of an owl eye appearance. In case of CMV, you have an owl eye appearance, but then you're also going to be having the presence of a deeply basophilic as well as location of the intraviral inclusions, both at the level of the nucleoli and nucleus as well as at the level of the cytosol. So this is what is going to be classically in a patient with a history of immunosuppression would help you to distinguish between that fact. So when you are looking at that question, owl eye appearance was not the only thing that would have actually trapped you. Some of you actually got trapped in the question because you thought owl eye appearance, Reed-Sternberg cell, and then you tick the answer as EBV. But I want you to remember, owl eye appearance in an immunosuppressed individual is what is going to be associated with CMV infection, and therefore the answer for this question happened to be option A. So having said that, we had a wonderful discussion so far as the questions were concerned. As you would have realized by this point of time, almost thankfully by the grace of the Almighty, all questions were actually coming from the videos and the content that we had, kind of put in the hard work for you, and the questions were easily cracked on the basis of that kind of a content. I just would like to take 2 extra minutes of your time by having just a simple request to you. Please remember, friends, that the trend of the examination is going to be undergoing a shift. So there is a less likely possibility of we being given direct questions in the exam, as a lot of us are in the habit of. So we need to be understanding the concepts regarding the pathophysiology of a disease. We must be able to identify the reason why you're giving a particular medicine. You need to understand the reason why you're conducting a particular investigation as a preferential investigation, and having that holistic approach to the particular question that is being asked to you. Why they are taking a holistic approach is because they understand that you are bright people, wonderful people, and you are going to be treating patients in reality. So they want you to be familiar with an actual presentation of a patient who would be coming up to you in your clinics. You are able to identify, suspect certain kind of disorders, carry out the appropriate investigations, pick up the right medications for the patient, and then logically treat the patient successfully. So develop that kind of an approach. Do watch out the videos regularly. Do practice your MCQs regularly. Make sure that you are appearing in the grand tests which are being conducted regularly. And there is a 99.999% chance, except for that 0.001% chance of somebody missing out on this kind of a schedule, that you are going to be coming out with flying colors in the exam. So I hope you had as much wonderful discussion, as much a wonderful time that you spent, as much I did talking about all those questions with you. My best wishes for a great future to all of you.